The bitter March wind tore at Tessa Clarke's shawl as she clutched her 3-month-old daughter closer to her chest, the child's whimpers barely audible above the howling gale. Behind her, the door to her family home slammed with a finality that spoke volumes. She was no longer welcome there. Never again would she cross that threshold, not after bringing what her father called shame and dishonor upon the Clarke name. It was 1878 in the Nebraska Territory, and an unmarried woman with a child had few places to turn. Tessa's feet crunched through the remaining patches of late winter snow as she made her way down the muddy street of Oak Ridge, a small but growing settlement where everyone knew everyone's business. And now, everyone knew hers. "You have until sundown to be out of this house and out of this town," her father had declared, his face contorted with rage when she'd finally admitted the truth about little Emma's parentage. Her mother had wept silently in the corner, not daring to contradict her husband, though Tessa had caught the apologetic glance she'd cast her way. Now, with nothing but a small bag containing a few clothes for herself and Emma, plus the meager savings she'd managed to hide away while working at the town's dress shop, Tessa wondered where she could possibly go. The nearest town was 20 miles away, an impossible journey on foot with an infant, especially as twilight approached. She found herself at the edge of town, near the livery stable. Perhaps someone there might offer a ride, though she had precious little money to pay for such a service. As she approached, a tall figure emerged from the stable, leading a magnificent chestnut stallion. "Miss Clarke." The deep voice belonged to Lucas Merritt, whose sprawling ranch lay 10 miles outside of town. She'd only spoken to him a handful of times when he came to Oak Ridge for supplies. He was something of a mystery, a man who kept to himself, though rumors about him ran rampant. Some said he'd come west to escape the law, others claimed he was hiding from a broken heart. All Tessa knew was that he was unfailingly polite whenever their paths crossed. "Mr. Merritt," she acknowledged, quickly wiping away her tears with her free hand. Emma chose that moment to let out a wail, and Tessa tried to soothe her while maintaining what little dignity she had left. Lucas Merritt's dark eyes took in her travel bag, the crying infant, and the obvious distress on her face. His expression revealed nothing, but he paused, one hand still on the reins of his horse. "You seem to be in some trouble, Miss Clarke," he observed, his voice carrying no judgment, merely stating a fact. "I'm afraid I am," Tessa admitted, her pride already stripped away by the day's events. "My father has asked me to leave town. Immediately." Lucas's gaze traveled to Emma, then back to Tessa's face. Because of the child, it wasn't a question, but Tessa nodded anyway. "Yes." For a long moment, Lucas said nothing, and Tessa feared he would simply tip his hat and continue on his way. After all, her problems were not his concern. But then he surprised her. "I have a wagon at the back of the stable. I can take you to the next town if you wish," he offered, his tone matter of fact. Relief washed over Tessa. "That would be most kind, Mr. Merritt, but I don't have much money to pay you for," he held up a hand, cutting off her words. "I'm not asking for payment." He glanced at the darkening sky, "but we should leave now if we want to make any progress before nightfall." Tessa followed him around to the back of the stable where a sturdy wagon was hitched to 2 strong horses. Lucas helped her up onto the seat, careful not to disturb Emma, who had finally quieted. He settled her bag in the back before climbing up beside her. "Where exactly were you planning to go?" he asked as he guided the horses onto the road leading out of town. Tessa bit her lip. The truth was, she had no plan beyond getting away from her father's wrath. "I thought perhaps Pine Ridge might have worked for me. I'm a decent seamstress." Lucas nodded thoughtfully. "Pine Ridge is 40 miles west. We won't make it there tonight." He paused, seemingly considering something. "My ranch is closer. You could stay there tonight and I can take you to Pine Ridge tomorrow." Tessa felt a flicker of apprehension. Going to a man's home alone was precisely what had led to her current predicament. Yet something about Lucas Merritt's steady, straightforward manner reassured her. He hadn't once looked at her with the disgust or lascivious interest she'd come to expect from men since her condition had become known. "I wouldn't want to impose," she said hesitantly. "It's no imposition," he replied. I have a spare room that rarely sees use." Before she could respond, Emma began to fuss again. The cold wind was likely too much for her, despite the blankets Tessa had wrapped her in. Lucas noticed immediately. Without a word, he shrugged out of his heavy coat and held it out to Tessa. "Here, wrap the little one in this." "But you'll freeze," Tessa protested. "I'm used to the cold," he said simply. When she hesitated, he added, "Please, for the child." Tessa couldn't refuse. She took the coat and carefully wrapped it around Emma, who settled almost immediately in the additional warmth. The coat smelled of leather, hay, and something uniquely masculine that Tessa found oddly comforting. They traveled in silence for a while, the only sounds the creaking of the wagon and the rhythmic clopping of the horses' hooves. Tessa found herself studying Lucas from the corner of her eye. He was probably in his early 30s, with a strong profile and hands that spoke of years of hard work. His dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck beneath his hat, and a beard shadowed his jaw. "How old is she?" Lucas asked suddenly, nodding toward Emma. 3 months, Tessa answered, her voice soft. "What's her name?" "Emma." Lucas nodded approvingly. "A good name." They lapsed into silence again until Lucas spoke once more. "Your father, he gave you no choice." Tessa swallowed hard. "No, he said I had brought shame upon the family. That no decent man would have me now, and he couldn't bear to look at me anymore." The words still stung. Fresh as they were, Lucas's jaw tightened. Some men have strange notions about decency. Before Tessa could ask what he meant by that, he pointed ahead. "There's my place." Through the gathering dusk, Tessa could make out a sturdy log cabin set against a backdrop of rolling hills. As they drew closer, she saw that it was larger than she'd initially thought a proper house rather than a simple cabin. A barn stood nearby, along with a corral and several outbuildings. It was a real ranch, well established and clearly prosperous. Lucas brought the wagon to a stop near the front porch. "Wait here," he said, jumping down. He disappeared into the house briefly before returning. "I've lit the lamps, let me help you down." He reached up, and Tessa allowed him to lift her and Emma carefully from the wagon. His hands were strong and sure, and for a moment, Tessa felt an unfamiliar sense of security. Inside, the house was surprisingly comfortable. A large stone fireplace dominated the main room, flanked by sturdy furniture that, while simple, had clearly been chosen with care. Lucas immediately set about building up the fire. "The spare room is through there," he said, nodding toward a door off the main room. "I'll bring your bag in." While he went back out to the wagon, Tessa took the opportunity to look around. There were few personal touches, but she noticed a small shelf of books near the fireplace and a guitar propped in one corner. The kitchen area was neat and organized, though sparsely equipped. When Lucas returned with her bag, he showed her to the spare room. It was small but clean, with a bed, a chest of drawers, and a rocking chair by the window. "This will do nicely," Tessa said, genuinely grateful. "Thank you, Mr. Merritt." "Lucas," he corrected her. "And you're welcome, Miss Clarke." "Tessa, please," he nodded. "Are you hungry, Tessa? I was about to fix some supper." "Yes, actually," she admitted. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten. The day's events had driven all thoughts of food from her mind. "I'll prepare something while you get settled," he offered. Left alone with Emma, Tessa took the opportunity to change her daughter's wrappings and feed her. The room was warming up nicely from the heat of the fire in the main room, and for the first time since her father's pronouncement, Tessa felt she could breathe. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Lucas at the stove, stirring something that smelled wonderful. Emma had fallen asleep, so Tessa had laid her on the center of the bed, surrounded by pillows. "She's asleep," Tessa explained. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Lucas glanced over his shoulder. "You could set the table if you like. Plates are in that cabinet." As they worked together to prepare the simple meal, a hearty stew with biscuits, Tessa found herself relaxing. Lucas wasn't much for conversation, but his silence wasn't uncomfortable. When they sat down to eat, he asked practical questions about her plans, listening attentively to her uncertain answers. "Pine Ridge is growing," he told her. "They might have need of a seamstress, or you could try North Platte. It's larger, more opportunities there." "Have you been to these places recently?" Tessa asked. "I get around," he replied vaguely. Part of ranching is knowing what's happening in the territory. After they finished eating, Lucas refused her offer to wash the dishes. "You should rest," he said. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Tessa couldn't argue with that logic. She was exhausted emotionally and physically. She checked on Emma, who was still sleeping peacefully, then turned back to Lucas. "I can't thank you enough for your kindness tonight," she said softly. Lucas looked momentarily uncomfortable with her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same, but they both knew that wasn't true. In her experience, kindness to a fallen woman was rare indeed. "Well, good night then," she said, retreating to the spare room. "Good night, Tessa," Lucas replied, his deep voice following her through the door. Despite her exhaustion, sleep didn't come easily. Tessa lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of how her life had changed so dramatically in a single day. By morning, she would be in a new town, starting over completely. The prospect was terrifying. Emma woke twice during the night, and each time Tessa tended to her quickly, hoping her cries wouldn't disturb Lucas. The second time, as she was rocking Emma back to sleep, she heard a soft knock at the door. "Yes," she called quietly. The door opened slightly and Lucas stood there, a cup in his hand. "I thought you might like some tea," he said. "I heard the little one fussing." Touched by his thoughtfulness, Tessa accepted the cup. "Thank you, I'm sorry if we woke you." "I'm a light sleeper," he said with a slight shrug. "Comes from years of listening for predators around the livestock." As he turned to leave, Tessa found herself asking, "How long have you had this ranch?" Lucas paused. 6 years, built it from nothing." "You've done well," she observed. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "It's been hard work, but worth it." He glanced at Emma in Tessa's arms. "She's a beautiful child." "Thank you," Tessa whispered. With a nod, Lucas withdrew, closing the door softly behind him. Morning came all too soon. Tessa woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. She quickly dressed herself and Emma, gathered their few belongings, and joined Lucas in the kitchen. He was fully dressed and had clearly been up for some time. "There's breakfast," he said, nodding toward a plate on the table. "We should leave within the hour if we want to reach Pine Ridge by nightfall." Tessa sat down to eat, balancing Emma in one arm. Lucas watched her struggle for a moment before stepping forward. "May I?" he asked, holding out his arms for the baby. Surprised, Tessa hesitated only briefly before handing Emma to him. Lucas cradled the infant with unexpected skill, looking down at her with a gentle expression that transformed his usually stern features. "You've held babies before," Tessa observed. "I had younger siblings," he said, his eyes still on Emma. "Our mother died when the youngest was just an infant. I helped raise them." "Where are they now?" Tessa asked. A shadow crossed Lucas's face. "Back east. My brother runs the family farm in Pennsylvania. My sisters are both married." "Do you see them often?" "No," he said simply, and something in his tone told Tessa not to press further. They finished breakfast, and Lucas helped Tessa load her bag into the wagon. As they prepared to leave, Tessa took one last look at the ranch house. For just one night, it had been a safe haven, and she felt a surprising reluctance to leave it behind. Lucas noticed her hesitation. "Is something wrong?" "No," she said quickly. "I was just thinking." He studied her face for a moment, then said, "We should go." The journey to Pine Ridge was long and largely silent. Emma was more fussy than usual, perhaps sensing her mother's anxiety about what awaited them. Around midday, they stopped by a stream to rest the horses and eat the lunch Lucas had packed. As Tessa fed Emma, Lucas stood a short distance away, looking out over the prairie. His tall figure cut a striking silhouette against the vast sky, and Tessa found herself wondering about the life he led, alone on his ranch. He seemed content with his solitude, yet there was something in his manner that hinted at a deeper story. "Why did you help us?" she asked suddenly. Lucas turned, surprised by the question. "What do you mean? You could have simply wished me luck and gone on your way yesterday. Instead, you've gone out of your way to help a woman you barely know." He was quiet for so long that Tessa thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I know what it's like to be alone in the world, to have nowhere to turn." His eyes met hers briefly before looking away again. "No one should have to face that." They resumed their journey shortly after, and by late afternoon, the outskirts of Pine Ridge came into view. It was indeed larger than Oak Ridge, with more businesses lining its main street. Lucas drove directly to the town's only hotel, a two-story building that had seen better days but appeared clean and respectable. "Wait here," he said, jumping down from the wagon. He disappeared inside the hotel, returning several minutes later. "They have a room available." "I've paid for 3 nights." "Mr. Merritt, Lucas, I can't accept that," Tessa protested. "Consider it a loan if your pride requires it," he said pragmatically. "You can repay me when you're settled." He helped her down from the wagon and carried her bag inside. The hotel proprietor, a plump woman named Mrs. Holloway, greeted them warmly. "Your husband explained your situation, dear," she said kindly to Tessa. "Traveling with an infant is never easy. I've given you our quietest room." Before Tessa could correct the woman's assumption about their relationship, Lucas spoke. "Is there a dress shop in town that might be hiring?" "Why, yes," Mrs. Holloway replied. "Mrs. Peterson just mentioned yesterday that she's looking for someone skilled with a needle. Her shop is just down the street." "Thank you," Lucas said. He turned to Tessa. "I'll take you there tomorrow morning if you like." Tessa nodded, overwhelmed by his continued assistance. Mrs. Holloway led them upstairs to a small but clean room with a bed, a washstand, and a crib that had seen many years of use. "I keep this for my traveling guests with little ones," Mrs. Holloway explained, patting the crib. "My own children are all grown now." Once they were alone, Tessa turned to Lucas. "The proprietor thinks we're married." "It was simpler than explaining," he said with a slight shrug. "A married woman with a child raises fewer eyebrows than—" He trailed off, seeming to realize too late that his words might hurt. "Then a woman of questionable virtue," Tessa finished for him, her voice tight. Lucas frowned. "That's not what I meant. It's all right," Tessa said, forcing a smile. "You've been more than kind, and I'm grateful, truly." Lucas looked as though he wanted to say something more, but instead nodded toward the door. "I should find somewhere to stay for the night. I'll come by in the morning to take you to the dress shop." "You're not returning to your ranch tonight?" Tessa asked, surprised. "It's too late to start back now," he explained. "I'll leave tomorrow after I've helped you get situated." After he left, Tessa sat on the edge of the bed, Emma sleeping peacefully in the borrowed crib. She was in a strange town, alone except for her infant daughter, with just enough money to last a few weeks if she was careful. Yet somehow, thanks to Lucas Merritt's unexpected kindness, she felt less hopeless than she had yesterday. She wondered if she would ever see him again after tomorrow. The thought brought an unexpected pang of sadness. The next morning, Lucas arrived as promised, and together they walked to Mrs. Peterson's dress shop. The older woman was initially hesitant when Tessa inquired about work, eyeing Emma with concern. "I'm not sure, dear. A small baby requires a great deal of attention, and I need someone who can focus on their work." "My wife is exceptionally skilled," Lucas interjected smoothly, "and our living arrangements are nearby. She could return to feed the baby when necessary." Tessa shot him a surprised glance at his continued pretense, but said nothing to contradict him. Mrs. Peterson seemed somewhat reassured. "Well, I suppose we could try it for a week and see how it goes. Could you show me some of your work, Mrs. Merritt?" Lucas supplied before Tessa could speak. "Tessa Merritt." Tessa opened her bag and removed a small bundle of fabric samples of her embroidery and stitching that she'd had the foresight to bring. Mrs. Peterson examined them with a critical eye, then nodded approvingly. "These are quite good, very neat work. When could you start?" "Tomorrow, if that suits you," Tessa replied, hardly daring to believe her luck. With the matter settled, Lucas and Tessa left the shop. Outside on the boardwalk, Tessa turned to him. "Why did you tell her we were married?" Lucas looked uncomfortable. It seemed the most practical solution. A married woman with a husband in town is more likely to be hired than. He stopped, searching for the right words. "Than a woman alone with an illegitimate child," Tessa finished for him, her voice low. "Yes," he admitted. "I'm sorry if I overstepped," Tessa sighed. "No, you're right, it was practical." She looked up at him. "But what happens when you leave and Mrs. Peterson realizes I've been lying?" Lucas was quiet for a moment, seemed to consider something. Then he said, "Come with me back to the ranch." Tessa stared at him. "What? I have plenty of room, he continued, his words coming faster now as if he was working out the idea as he spoke. You could have the spare room. I'm often away from the house during the day, working the land so you'd have privacy. And in return, perhaps you could cook and help with some of the household tasks. You're offering me a position as your housekeeper, Tessa asked, trying to understand. I'm offering you a home, Lucas said simply, for you and Emma. A place where you don't have to pretend or explain yourselves to anyone. Tessa was speechless. The offer was unexpected and overwhelmingly generous, yet the practical side of her mind raised immediate concerns. People would talk, she said finally. An unmarried woman living with a bachelor. People always talk, Lucas replied with a hint of bitterness. But my nearest neighbors are 5 miles away. We wouldn't be under constant scrutiny like you would be here. He had a point. In a small town like Pine Ridge, everyone would eventually learn her story, just as they had in Oak Ridge. The prospect of facing those judgmental stares and whispers again made her heart sink. Why would you do this? She asked, searching his face for some hidden motive. Lucas's expression softened slightly. Because that house is too big for just one person. Because Emma deserves a chance to grow up somewhere stable. Because he stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. Because it's the right thing to do. Tessa looked down at Emma, sleeping peacefully in her arms, unaware of the momentous decision being contemplated. A home on a prosperous ranch away from prying eyes and judgmental whispers, versus an uncertain future in yet another strange town where her past might follow her at any moment. I would pay you a fair wage, Lucas added when she remained silent. You could save it, build a future for yourself and Emma, go wherever you want when she's older. And if it doesn't work out, Tessa asked, then I'll bring you back to town or to any other town you choose, he promised. No questions asked, Tessa took a deep breath. It was a risk, certainly. But perhaps a lesser risk than trying to make her way alone. All right, she said finally. We'll come with you. A hint of a smile touched Lucas's lips. Good, we'll leave tomorrow morning. They returned to the hotel to inform Mrs. Holloway of the change in plans and to apologize to Mrs. Peterson? The dress shop owner was disappointed but understood when Lucas explained that he needed his wife's help at the ranch more than he had initially realized. That night, as Tessa prepared for bed, she wondered if she had made the right decision. She knew almost nothing about Lucas Merritt beyond his kindness and his apparent solitude. Yet something about him inspired trust, and right now, trust was a precious commodity in her life. The journey back to the ranch the next day was more relaxed than their initial trip to Pine Ridge. Emma was in better spirits, and Tessa found herself asking Lucas questions about ranching life, genuinely curious about what awaited them. It's hard work, he told her honestly, but rewarding. I raise cattle primarily, though I keep some horses too. The land is good. There's a creek that runs through the property that never runs dry, even in the hottest summers. And you manage it all alone? Tessa asked. I hire hands during the busiest season's roundup, branding, that sort of thing, but day to day it's just me. It sounds lonely, Tessa observed, then immediately regretted her candor. I'm sorry, that was presumptuous, but Lucas didn't seem offended. It can be, he acknowledged, but there's a peacefulness to it too. After years of noise and crowds back east, I find I prefer the quiet. When they arrived at the ranch, Lucas showed Tessa around more thoroughly than he had during her brief stay 2 nights before. In addition to the main house, there was a barn, a corral, a chicken coop, and a small vegetable garden that had seen better days. I'm not much of a gardener, Lucas admitted when he saw Tessa examining the neglected plot. It produces enough, but it could yield more with proper care. I could help with that, Tessa offered. My mother kept a garden and I learned a great deal from her. Lucas nodded. That would be welcome. Inside the house, he showed her the kitchen supplies and where everything was stored. The pantry was well stocked with basics: flour, sugar, coffee, dried beans, and preserved foods. I go to town for supplies about once a month, he explained. If there's anything specific you need, let me know and I'll add it to the list. As evening approached, Tessa insisted on cooking dinner, partly to repay Lucas's kindness and partly to establish her usefulness in this new arrangement. She prepared a simple but hearty meal of beans, bacon, and cornbread, using what was available in the pantry. Lucas ate with obvious appreciation. "This is the best meal I've had at this table in years," he said when he'd finished. "Usually I just throw something together at the end of the day." "I'm glad you enjoyed it," Tessa replied, pleased by his praise. "Cooking for someone else is more satisfying than cooking for oneself." After dinner, Lucas excused himself to tend to the animals. Left alone, Tessa settled Emma in the spare room, which was now their room, and began to unpack their few belongings. The domesticity of the task gave her a strange sense of hope, as if she were truly setting up a home rather than merely occupying a temporary space. When Lucas returned, he found her sitting by the fire, mending one of Emma's blankets. "Everything all right?" he asked, removing his hat and coat. "Yes," Tessa replied. "Emma's asleep, and I thought I'd make myself useful." Lucas nodded, then retrieved a ledger from a shelf and sat down at the table. Tessa watched him from the corner of her eye as he worked, his brow furrowed in concentration as he made notations and calculations. "Ranch business?" she asked after a while. "Yes," he answered without looking up. "Keeping track of expenses, planning for the spring cattle drive." "It seems complicated." This time he did look up, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Not really, it's just arithmetic and planning. The real work is out there." He nodded toward the window, indicating the land beyond. Tessa found herself smiling. "Well, I'm good with a needle and thread, decent in a kitchen, and I can tend a garden, but I know nothing about cattle." "I don't expect you to help with the ranching," Lucas assured her. "That's my domain. You have enough to manage with Emma and the household." They fell into a comfortable silence after that, each absorbed in their respective tasks. When Tessa finally stood to retire for the night, Lucas looked up from his ledger. "Tessa," he said, his voice serious, "I want you to know that you and Emma are safe here, whatever happened before." "It doesn't matter to me." Tessa felt a lump form in her throat at his words. "Thank you," she managed to say. "Good night, Lucas." "Good night, Tessa." In the days that followed, Tessa settled into life at the ranch with surprising ease. She established a routine around Emma's needs, cooking meals, keeping the house in order, and beginning the work of revitalizing the vegetable garden. Lucas was true to his word. He spent most daylight hours outside, working with the cattle or mending fences or tending to countless other ranch tasks. When their paths did cross, usually at breakfast and dinner, their conversations were friendly but somewhat reserved. Lucas was not a man who spoke unnecessarily, and Tessa was still cautious, aware of her vulnerable position as a woman alone with a man she barely knew, regardless of how honorable he seemed. One evening, about 2 weeks after they had returned to the ranch, Tessa was preparing dinner when Lucas came in from outside. He was covered in dust and looked exhausted. "There's wash water heating on the stove," Tessa told him. "Dinner will be ready soon." "Thank you," he said, moving to wash his hands and face. "I had to chase down a steer that broke through the north fence. Took most of the afternoon to find him and drive him back." "Is that unusual?" Tessa asked, genuinely curious about the work that occupied his days. "Not especially." "Cattle have minds of their own sometimes." He dried his face on a towel. "The real work will start soon when calving begins." "Will you need to hire help then?" Lucas shook his head. "Not for calving. That's a watchful eye more than anything. The spring roundup is when I'll bring on extra hands." As they ate dinner, Tessa noticed Lucas wincing slightly when he reached for the bread. "Are you hurt?" she asked. "It's nothing," he dismissed. "Just wrenched my shoulder a bit when I was mending the fence." Tessa frowned. "Let me look at it after dinner." "My father," she stopped, the reference to her family still painful. "I know a bit about treating sprains and strains." Lucas looked as though he might refuse, but then nodded. "All right." After the meal, Tessa had Lucas sit in a chair while she examined his shoulder. He was tense under her touch, and she realized this was the first time they had made physical contact beyond the brief assistance he had offered when helping her in and out of the wagon. "You need to relax for me to feel if anything is out of place," she instructed, trying to keep her tone professional despite her own awareness of the intimacy of the situation. Lucas made a visible effort to relax his muscles. Tessa carefully pressed along his shoulder and upper back, feeling for any signs of injury. "I don't think anything is torn," she said finally, "but you've definitely strained the muscles. You should try to rest it for a day or two." Lucas gave a short laugh. "Not much chance of that." "There's always work to be done." "At least try not to use it for anything strenuous," Tessa advised. "I can make a liniment that might help with the pain and stiffness. My mother taught me." "Your mother sounds like a knowledgeable woman," Lucas observed, Tessa's hands stilled on his shoulder. "She is," she sighed. "I miss her." "Have you thought about writing to her?" Lucas suggested. "I go to town every few weeks. I could post a letter for you." Tessa considered the idea. Her mother hadn't defended her against her father's wrath, but neither had she condemned her. Perhaps there was a chance for reconciliation, at least with her. "Maybe I will," she said. "Thank you." Later that night, after Emma had been fed and put to bed, Tessa sat at the kitchen table with paper and pen that Lucas had provided. She started and discarded several versions of a letter to her mother before finally settling on a simple, honest account of where she was and how she was faring. She mentioned Lucas only briefly, describing him as a kind employer who had offered her and Emma a place to stay and work to do. When she finished, she sealed the letter and placed it on the table for Lucas to take on his next trip to town. Then she went to check on Emma one last time before retiring for the night. As she bent over the crib, she heard a soft sound from the main room. Curious, she peered through the partially open door. Lucas was sitting by the fire, the guitar she had noticed earlier in his hands. He was playing a slow, melancholy tune, his eyes closed as his fingers moved over the strings. The music was beautiful, filling the quiet house with a soulful melody that spoke of loneliness and longing. Tessa stood transfixed, watching this private moment. She had never seen Lucas so unguarded, so expressive. The music revealed a depth of emotion that his typically stoic manner concealed. Not wanting to intrude, she quietly closed her door and prepared for bed, the haunting melody following her into her dreams. Spring arrived in full force over the next few weeks, bringing with it new life to the ranch. The first calves were born, keeping Lucas busy day and night. Tessa found herself helping more than either of them had anticipated, keeping watch over the pregnant cows when Lucas needed rest, and even assisting with a difficult birth when Lucas was dealing with another emergency elsewhere on the property. "You have a natural way with the animals," Lucas observed one evening after Tessa had successfully helped a first-time mother cow accept her calf. "Not everyone does. I like them," Tessa said simply. "They don't judge." Lucas gave her a long look. "No, they don't." As the days grew warmer, Tessa spent more time outside with Emma, who was now nearly 5 months old and growing rapidly. The vegetable garden was flourishing under Tessa's care, and she had even started a small herb garden closer to the house. One sunny afternoon, Lucas returned from checking the herd to find Tessa sitting on a blanket in the yard, Emma propped up beside her, giggling as her mother played a simple game of peek-a-boo. He stopped to watch them, a smile softening his usually serious expression. Emma spotted him and let out a delighted squeal, waving her arms excitedly. "She recognizes you," Tessa said, surprised. Lucas had been careful to keep a respectful distance from both of them, and while he occasionally held Emma when Tessa needed both hands free for a task, he had never sought out time with the baby. Lucas approached and crouched down beside the blanket. "Hello, little one," he said softly, extending a finger which Emma promptly grabbed with her whole hand. "She's strong," he commented, genuine admiration in his voice. "She is," Tessa agreed proudly. The doctor in Oak Ridge said she was the sturdiest baby he'd seen in years. Lucas studied Emma's face. "She looks like you, same eyes." "Yes, everyone says that," Tessa replied, then added quietly, "It's a blessing, really." Lucas glanced at her, a question in his eyes, but he didn't ask. Instead, he said, "I need to ride to the north pasture to check on a few strays. Would you and Emma like to come along? I could saddle the mare for you. She's gentle, and it's a nice day for a ride." Tessa hesitated. She hadn't been on a horse since before Emma was born. "I'm not sure about riding with an infant. We could take the wagon," Lucas suggested instead. "It would be slower but safer for Emma." The genuine desire in his voice to include them touched Tessa. "The wagon sounds perfect," she agreed. 20 minutes later, they were heading across the ranch, Emma securely nestled in Tessa's arms. Lucas pointed out various landmarks and explained aspects of ranching that Tessa had been curious about. His knowledge of the land and the animals was impressive, and his passion for his work evident in every word. "How did you learn all this?" Tessa asked. "You mentioned you grew up on a farm in Pennsylvania, but cattle ranching must be quite different." Lucas nodded. "It is. I worked on several ranches when I first came west, learning the business from the ground up, made plenty of mistakes along the way." He smiled wryly. "Still do occasionally." "Why did you leave Pennsylvania?" Tessa asked, then immediately regretted her curiosity when she saw Lucas's expression close off. "I needed a change," he said simply. Clearly unwilling to elaborate, they rode in silence for a while until they reached the north pasture. Lucas spotted the strays he was looking for and, after helping Tessa and Emma down from the wagon, went to herd them back toward the main group. Tessa watched him work, impressed by his skill and the easy way he handled his horse. Emma began to fuss, so Tessa walked with her, showing her the wildflowers that dotted the grass and the butterflies that flitted among them. When Lucas returned, he found them by a small stream that cut through the pasture. Tessa was kneeling, letting Emma touch the cool water with her tiny fingers. "Teaching her about nature already?" Lucas asked, dismounting. "It's never too early," Tessa replied, smiling up at him. "She seems fascinated by everything." Lucas crouched beside them, watching Emma's delighted reaction to the water. "She's a bright little thing." "Yes, she is," Tessa agreed proudly. For a moment, they simply knelt there together, watching Emma explore this new sensation. Tessa was acutely aware of Lucas's presence beside her, the warmth of him in the cool spring air. When she glanced at him, she found him looking not at Emma but at her, an unreadable expression in his dark eyes. He quickly looked away when their eyes met, rising to his feet. "We should head back," he said, his voice slightly gruff. "It'll be supper time soon." The ride back to the ranch was quieter, but not uncomfortably so. As they approached the house, Tessa found herself wishing the afternoon could have lasted longer. It had been pleasant, almost like a family outing, a thought that both warmed and troubled her. She and Emma were not Lucas's family, despite living under his roof. She would do well to remember that. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Tessa joined Lucas on the porch. It had become something of a habit in recent weeks, sitting together in the cool evening air, sometimes talking, sometimes just enjoying the peaceful quiet of the ranch at night. "Thank you for taking us along today," Tessa said, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the slight chill. "I enjoyed the company," Lucas replied, his voice soft in the darkness. Tessa hesitated, then said, "Lucas, may I ask you something personal?" He tensed slightly but nodded. "You can ask, I might not answer." "Fair enough," she acknowledged. "I was wondering, have you ever been married?" The question hung in the air between them. Finally, Lucas said, "No, I came close once back in Pennsylvania." "What happened?" Tessa prompted gently when he didn't continue. Lucas sighed, leaning forward to rest his elbows on his knees. "Her name was Catherine. We were engaged to be married." "But then the war came." "The Civil War?" Tessa asked, surprised. Lucas would have been quite young then. "Yes, I enlisted in the Union Army, spent 3 years fighting." His voice had taken on a distant quality. "When I came back, I was different." She said she didn't recognize the man who returned. "I'm sorry," Tessa said softly. Lucas shrugged, a gesture that seemed designed to minimize the pain she could hear in his voice. "It was a long time ago. She married someone else, a man who'd stayed behind. They have children now, I hear." "Is that why you came west, to start over?" "Partly," he admitted. "I couldn't stay there watching her build a life with someone else, and after what I'd seen in the war, the farm seemed confining. I needed open space, room to breathe." Tessa nodded, understanding. "And have you found what you were looking for here?" Lucas was quiet for a long moment. "I thought I had," he said finally. "The ranch, the work, it's been enough, until recently." "What changed?" Tessa asked, her heart beating a little faster. Lucas turned to look at her, his expression hidden in the darkness. "I think you know," he said quietly. Tessa's breath caught in her throat. Before she could respond, Lucas stood up. "It's getting late. We should both get some rest." With that, he went inside, leaving Tessa alone with her thoughts and the vast star-filled sky above. The next morning, there was a subtle shift in their interactions. Nothing overt, but Tessa felt a new awareness between them, as if Lucas's veiled admission had changed something fundamental in their relationship. They were more careful around each other, more conscious of accidental touches or prolonged glances. Lucas threw himself into his work with even greater intensity, often leaving before dawn and returning after dark. Tessa busied herself with Emma, the garden and household tasks, trying not to dwell on the conversation on the porch or what it might mean. A week passed in this fashion until the day Lucas announced he needed to go to town for supplies. "Is there anything specific you need?" he asked as he prepared to leave. "Some fabric, if you don't mind," Tessa replied. "Emma is growing so quickly and I'd like to make her some new clothes." Lucas nodded. "I'll see what they have at the general store. Any particular color?" "Blue would be nice," Tessa said, touched by his thoughtfulness. "And perhaps some ribbon if it's not too dear." "Consider it done," Lucas said. He hesitated, then added, "I posted your letter to your mother on my last trip to town. There might be a reply by now." Tessa's heart leapt at the possibility. "Thank you for remembering," Lucas smiled slightly. "I'll be back by tomorrow evening at the latest. Will you be all right here alone?" "Of course," Tessa assured him. "We'll be fine." After Lucas left, the house seemed unusually quiet. Tessa realized how accustomed she had become to his presence, even when they weren't in the same room. The knowledge that he was somewhere on the property had become a comfort, a security she hadn't known she relied upon until it was temporarily removed. She spent the day catching up on laundry and baking bread, activities that kept her hands busy while her mind wandered. Emma was more fussy than usual, as if she too sensed the absence in the house. "He'll be back tomorrow," Tessa told her daughter as she rocked her to sleep that night, "and perhaps he'll bring a letter from your grandmother." The thought of reconnecting with her mother brought both hope and anxiety. Would her mother respond with love and forgiveness, or would her letter reflect her father's continued anger? Tessa slept fitfully, waking at every small sound, her body attuned to potential threats now that she was alone with Emma. When morning finally came, she was relieved to see the sun streaming through the window, banishing the shadows that had seemed so ominous during the night. The day passed slowly as Tessa waited for Lucas's return. She kept herself busy, but her eyes frequently strayed to the road that led to town, hoping to catch sight of him. It was late afternoon when she finally saw a rider approaching, but as the figure drew closer, Tessa realized with disappointment that it wasn't Lucas. It was a stranger, a man riding a gray horse that Tessa didn't recognize. She retreated inside, closing the door firmly. Emma was napping, and Tessa stood near the window, watching as the rider approached the house. He was middle-aged, with a weathered face and a neat beard. He dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post, then approached the door and knocked. Tessa hesitated before opening it just enough to see him properly. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice steady despite her unease. The man removed his hat. "Madam, I'm looking for Lucas Merritt. Is he around?" "Mr. Merritt is in town on business," Tessa replied cautiously. "He should return later today. May I tell him who called?" "Name's Harlan Bishop. I'm from the Circle B Ranch, about 20 miles south." He studied Tessa with open curiosity. "And you would be?" "Tessa Clarke. I work for Mr. Merritt." Mr. Bishop's eyebrows rose slightly. "I see. Well, Miss Clarke, would you tell Lucas that I stopped by? I wanted to discuss purchasing some of his yearlings for breeding stock." "I'll tell him," Tessa promised, relaxing slightly now that she understood the purpose of his visit. Mr. Bishop replaced his hat. "Much obliged, Miss Clarke." He hesitated, then added, "If you don't mind my saying so, Lucas has been keeping some interesting changes to his household arrangement rather quiet." Tessa felt her cheeks warm. "As I said, Mr. Bishop, I work for Mr. Merritt, as his housekeeper." "Of course," Bishop replied, though his tone suggested he drew his own conclusions. "Well, good day to you, Miss Clarke. After he left, Tessa closed the door and leaned against it, troubled by the encounter. She knew how it must look to an outsider, a single woman living on a remote ranch with an unmarried man. The fact that she had a child only complicated the picture further. She was still dwelling on this when Lucas finally returned just before sunset. He came in laden with supplies, including several packages wrapped in brown paper that he handed to Tessa. "The fabric you wanted," he explained, "and some other things I thought might be useful." Tessa unwrapped the packages to find not only the blue fabric she had requested, but also a length of pretty calico, some ribbon, and a small wooden toy for Emma. "Lucas, this is too much," she protested. "It's nothing," he dismissed, though he looked pleased by her reaction. "Did everything go all right while I was away?" "Yes, although you had a visitor," Tessa told him. "A Mr. Bishop from the Circle B Ranch. He wanted to discuss buying some of your yearlings." Lucas nodded. "Harlan's been after my breeding stock for a while now. I'll ride over there tomorrow." He pulled an envelope from his pocket. "And this came for you?" Tessa took the letter with trembling hands, recognizing her mother's handwriting immediately. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll start unloading the rest of the supplies," Lucas said, giving her privacy to read the letter. Tessa sat down at the table and carefully opened the envelope. Her mother's words flowed across the page, full of love and concern. She wrote that she missed Tessa terribly and thought of her and Emma every day. She explained that Tessa's father had forbidden anyone in the household to speak Tessa's name, but that she had been secretly hoping for news of her daughter. The letter ended with a plea for Tessa to keep writing and a promise that, somehow, her mother would find a way to see her and meet her granddaughter. Tears streamed down Tessa's face as she finished reading. The letter offered no solution to the rift with her father, but it was a connection, a thread of family that had not been severed completely. Lucas came in from outside and stopped when he saw her tears. "Bad news?" he asked gently. Tessa shook her head. "No, my mother, she still loves me." "She wants to know Emma." She wiped her eyes. "It's more than I dared hope for." Lucas sat down across from her. "I'm glad," he said simply. "Family is important." "Yes, it is," Tessa agreed. She studied his face. "Do you ever hear from your family back east?" "Occasionally," Lucas replied. "My brother writes a few times a year, one of my sisters too, though less frequently." "Do you miss them?" Tessa asked. Lucas considered the question. "Sometimes, but we've grown apart over the years. Their lives are very different from mine now." Tessa nodded, understanding. Her own life had taken a dramatic turn from the path her parents had envisioned for her. Sometimes, she barely recognized herself as the same person who had once been the dutiful daughter of a respectable Oak Ridge family. "Mr. Bishop seemed surprised to find me here," Tessa said, changing the subject. "I think he assumed—" "Well, you can imagine what he assumed." Lucas's expression darkened. "What did he say to you?" "Nothing directly inappropriate," Tessa assured him. "But his manner suggested he didn't believe I was merely your housekeeper." "People will talk," Lucas said, echoing his words from their conversation in Pine Ridge. "It doesn't matter what they think, doesn't it?" Tessa asked softly. "Your reputation in the territory, your business dealings with men like Mr. Bishop, couldn't they be affected by such assumptions?" Lucas leaned forward, his expression intense. "Tessa, I've never cared much for what others think of me. That hasn't changed. The only opinions that matter to me are those of the people under this roof." His words warmed her, yet Tessa couldn't help but worry. "I don't want to be the cause of any difficulties for you after all you've done for us." "You're not," Lucas said firmly. Then more gently, "Having you and Emma here, it's changed things for the better. Surely you know that." Tessa met his gaze, seeing the sincerity there. "Yes," she admitted. "I do know that." They looked at each other for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Emma's cry from the bedroom broke the silence, and Tessa rose to tend to her daughter. As spring gave way to early summer, life on the ranch fell into a pleasant rhythm. Lucas continued to work from dawn until dusk, but he now made a point of spending time with Tessa and Emma in the evenings. Sometimes they would sit on the porch, talking about their day or making plans for the ranch. Other times, Lucas would play his guitar while Tessa sewed or mended by the fire. Emma, now 7 months old and becoming more mobile by the day, delighted in these family moments, often crawling from one adult to the other, babbling happily. Tessa found herself looking forward to these evenings with an eagerness that both thrilled and frightened her. The feelings she was developing for Lucas were becoming impossible to ignore, yet she was hesitant to acknowledge them, even to herself. Her experience with Emma's father, a traveling salesman who had professed love only to disappear when he learned of her pregnancy, had taught her painful lessons about trust and vulnerability. Lucas, too, seemed to be wrestling with his emotions. Tessa would sometimes catch him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, his expression a mixture of longing and uncertainty. Yet he maintained a respectful distance, never overstepping the boundaries of their arrangement. One evening in late June, Lucas returned from town with news. "There's going to be a 4th of July celebration in Pine Ridge," he told Tessa as they sat down to dinner. "A picnic, games for the children, dancing later. I thought perhaps you and Emma might like to go." Tessa was surprised by the invitation. "Are you sure?" "People might talk even more if we appear in public together." Lucas shrugged. "Let them talk. You and Emma have been cooped up on this ranch for months now. A day in town, among other people, might be a welcome change." The prospect was indeed appealing. Despite her contentment with life at the ranch, Tessa sometimes missed the simple pleasure of conversing with other women or browsing in a store. "I'd like that," she said finally. "Thank you." Lucas smiled, one of his rare, full smiles that transformed his face. "Good, it's settled then." On the morning of the 4th of July, Tessa dressed with particular care. She had used some of the fabric Lucas had brought from town to make a new dress for herself, a simple but pretty blue cotton with white trim. For Emma, she had fashioned a matching dress, complete with a tiny white bonnet to shield her from the sun. When Lucas saw them, he stopped in his tracks. "You both look beautiful," he said, his voice slightly rough. "Thank you," Tessa replied, pleased by his reaction. "You look quite handsome yourself." It was true. Lucas had clearly made an effort with his appearance, wearing a clean white shirt with his best vest and trousers. He had trimmed his beard and slicked back his dark hair, and the overall effect was striking. The journey to Pine Ridge was filled with anticipation. Emma, secured in Tessa's lap, seemed to sense the excitement of the day ahead, babbling and pointing at everything they passed. Pine Ridge was transformed for the celebration. American flags hung from buildings, bunting decorated the storefronts, and a large area near the town square had been set up with tables for the picnic. Children ran about, playing games, while adults gathered in groups, chatting and laughing. As Lucas helped Tessa down from the wagon, she felt a momentary apprehension at the curious glances cast their way. But Lucas's steady presence beside her gave her courage, and she held her head high as they made their way toward the festivities. Mrs. Peterson from the dress shop was the first to approach them. "Miss Clarke, how lovely to see you again," she greeted Tessa warmly before turning to Lucas. "And Mr. Merritt, what a pleasure." "It's good to see you, Mrs. Peterson," Tessa replied, grateful for the friendly face. "This is my daughter, Emma." "What a darling child," Mrs. Peterson cooed, smiling at Emma. "She looks just like you, my dear." As the day progressed, Tessa found herself gradually relaxing. Most of the townspeople were welcoming, if curious about her relationship with Lucas. For his part, Lucas stayed close to her side, his protective manner leaving little doubt about his feelings, though he introduced Tessa simply as Miss Clarke, who helps me at the ranch. They enjoyed the picnic lunch, listened to the town band play patriotic tunes, and watched the children's games. Emma was fascinated by everything, especially the other children, and Tessa felt a pang as she realized how isolated her daughter's life had been thus far. "She should have friends her own age," Tessa murmured to Lucas as they watched a group of children playing with hoops. "We could come to town more often," Lucas suggested. "Or perhaps invite some of the neighboring families with children to the ranch." The casual way he spoke of future plans, as if their arrangement was permanent, both warmed and troubled Tessa. They had never discussed how long she and Emma would stay at the ranch. The weeks had turned into months, and neither had mentioned an end date to their arrangement. As evening approached, Tables were cleared away to create space for dancing. Lanterns were hung, casting a warm glow over the square, and the band struck up a lively tune. "Would you like to dance?" Lucas asked, his voice low near Tessa's ear. She hesitated. "What about Emma?" Mrs. Peterson, who had been cooing over Emma nearby, overheard. "I'd be happy to hold the little one for a dance or two," she offered. "If you don't mind, that is." Tessa looked at Lucas, who nodded encouragingly. "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson," she said, carefully transferring Emma to the older woman's arms. "We won't be long." Lucas led Tessa to the dancing area, placing one hand respectfully at her waist while taking her other hand in his. It was the closest they had ever been, and Tessa was acutely aware of his touch, the warmth of his hand through the fabric of her dress. "I'm not much of a dancer," Lucas admitted as they began to move with the music. "It's been years since I tried." "You're doing fine," Tessa assured him, though in truth, his movements were somewhat stiff and uncertain. "Just relax and follow the music." Gradually, Lucas did relax, and by the end of the song, they were moving more naturally together. When the music changed to a slower tune, Lucas drew her slightly closer, still maintaining a respectful distance, but allowing Tessa to feel the solid strength of him. "Thank you for suggesting this," Tessa said softly. "It's been a wonderful day." Lucas looked down at her, his eyes reflecting the glow of the lanterns. "Seeing you smile, watching Emma experience new things, it's been worth every curious glance and whispered comment." Tessa's heart beat faster at his words. Lucas, whatever she might have said, was interrupted by a commotion near the edge of the square. A man's loud, angry voice cut through the music and conversation, causing heads to turn. "Where is she? Where's my daughter?" Tessa froze, the blood draining from her face. She knew that voice all too well. "Tessa," Lucas asked, concern evident in his expression. "What's wrong, my father?" Tessa whispered, her voice barely audible. "He's here." Before Lucas could respond, the crowd parted and Thomas Clarke strode into the dancing area, his face flushed with anger. Behind him, Tessa's mother followed, looking distressed. "There you are," Thomas Clarke declared when he spotted Tessa, "making a spectacle of yourself as usual." Lucas immediately stepped slightly in front of Tessa, his posture protective. "Sir, I think you should calm down." Thomas Clarke's gaze shifted to Lucas, taking in his proximity to Tessa with obvious disgust. "And who are you? The latest man she's disgraced herself with." A murmur ran through the crowd at this accusation. Tessa felt herself trembling, both with fear and humiliation. "My name is Lucas Merritt," Lucas replied, his voice level but with an underlying steel. "Miss Clarke works for me as a housekeeper on my ranch." Thomas Clarke laughed bitterly. "Housekeeper, is that what they're calling it these days?" "Thomas, please," Tessa's mother intervened, placing a restraining hand on her husband's arm. "Not here, not like this." But Thomas Clarke shook off her hand. "I received your letter, Eleanor," he said to his wife. "Did you think I wouldn't find out you've been corresponding with her? Did you think I wouldn't notice when you slipped away to the post office?" Tessa looked at her mother in surprise. "You came to find me?" Eleanor Clarke's eyes filled with tears. "I had to see you, Tessa, and the baby." "Your father, he followed me." "Where is the child?" Thomas demanded, looking around. "That bastard you brought into the world." Lucas took a step forward, his fists clenched. "Mr. Clarke, I understand you're upset, but I won't allow you to speak to Tessa that way, nor to refer to Emma in such terms." "You won't allow?" Thomas Clarke drew himself up to his full height, though he was still several inches shorter than Lucas. "Who are you to tell me how to speak about my own daughter and her illegitimate child?" By now, the entire celebration had come to a halt, all eyes on the unfolding drama. Tessa spotted Mrs. Peterson at the edge of the crowd, still holding Emma, who had thankfully fallen asleep. "Father, please," Tessa said, finding her voice at last. "If you want to speak with me, we can do so privately. There's no need to create a scene." "A scene?" Thomas Clarke's voice rose. "You abandoned your family, your reputation, everything we taught you for what?" "To live in sin with yet another man," Lucas's patience finally snapped. "That's enough," he said firmly. "Tessa has done nothing wrong. She's a devoted mother working hard to provide for her child. If you can't see that, then you're blind to what truly matters." Thomas Clarke's face grew even redder. "How dare you, Thomas," Alina interrupted, her voice stronger now. "Lucas is right. I've read Tessa's letters. I've seen with my own eyes today how well she's doing. She made a mistake, yes, but she's facing the consequences with more courage than I've ever seen." Tessa stared at her mother in amazement. Never before had she heard Alina Clarke stand up to her husband so openly. Thomas Clarke seemed equally shocked by his wife's defiance. "Alina, you can't possibly approve of this arrangement." "What I approve of is seeing my daughter safe and well," Alina replied steadily, "and my granddaughter too." At that moment, as if on cue, Emma woke and began to cry. Mrs. Peterson approached hesitantly, bringing the fussing infant to Tessa. "I think she wants her mother," Mrs. Peterson said gently, transferring Emma to Tessa's arms. Thomas Clarke stared at his granddaughter, seeing her for the first time. Something in his expression shifted as he took in the tiny face, the small hands reaching for Tessa. "She looks like you did as a baby," he said to Tessa, his voice suddenly quiet. Tessa swallowed hard. "Yes, everyone says so." For a long moment, no one spoke. The crowd around them seemed to hold its collective breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Finally, Thomas Clarke cleared his throat. "I think we should continue this conversation somewhere more private," he said, his tone still stiff but the rage gone from his voice. Lucas immediately offered, "We can use Mrs. Holloway's parlor at the hotel. She knows me." Thomas Clarke looked as though he wanted to refuse, but then nodded curtly. "Very well." As they made their way through the crowd toward the hotel, Tessa felt Lucas's hand at the small of her back, a reassuring presence. She glanced up at him gratefully. "Are you all right?" he asked in a low voice. "I will be," she replied, drawing strength from his steady gaze. Mrs. Holloway was initially startled by the request for her private parlor, but quickly agreed when Lucas explained they needed a quiet place for a family discussion. She showed them into a comfortably furnished room, then discreetly withdrew, closing the door behind her. An awkward silence fell over the group. Tessa sat with Emma on her lap, Lucas standing protectively behind her chair. Her parents took seats on the sofa opposite, her father still rigid with disapproval, her mother looking anxiously between her husband and daughter. "May I hold her?" Alina asked suddenly, looking at Emma with longing. Tessa hesitated only briefly before passing Emma to her mother. Alina cradled her granddaughter with practiced ease, tears welling in her eyes as Emma looked up at her curiously. "Hello, little one," Alina whispered. "I'm your grandmother." Thomas Clarke watched his wife with the baby, his expression unreadable. Then he turned his attention to Lucas. "What exactly are your intentions toward my daughter, Mr. Merritt?" The directness of the question seemed to surprise Lucas, but he answered without hesitation. "I care for Tessa deeply, Mr. Clarke, and for Emma too. They've brought life and joy to my home, something I didn't realize was missing until they arrived." "So you admit that your relationship is more than employer and employee?" Thomas pressed. Lucas glanced at Tessa before responding. "My feelings for your daughter are honorable, sir. Beyond that, it's between Tessa and myself." "Lucas has been nothing but respectful and kind," Tessa interjected. "He offered us a home when we had nowhere to go, work when no one else would hire a woman with a child." "Whatever you may think of me, Father, Lucas deserves your gratitude, not your suspicion." Thomas Clarke's jaw worked as he absorbed this. "And what of the man who fathered your child? What of his responsibility?" Tessa's hands clenched in her lap. "He made it clear he wanted no part of that responsibility when I told him I was with child. He left town the next day and I haven't heard from him since." "His name?" Thomas demanded. "It doesn't matter," Tessa said firmly. "Emma is my child and I am raising her with or without your approval." Alina, still holding Emma, looked up at her husband. "Thomas, our granddaughter is here in our arms. Can't you set aside your pride for her sake, for Tessa's?" Thomas Clarke was silent for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he held out his arms toward Alina. "Let me see the child." With obvious trepidation, Alina carefully transferred Emma to her husband's arms. Thomas Clarke looked down at his granddaughter, his stern features softening almost imperceptibly as Emma reached up to touch his face. "She does look like you did," he said to Tessa, his voice gruff. "Same stubborn expression, too." It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly, but it was something, a crack in the wall of his disapproval. Mr. Merritt, Thomas said, looking up at Lucas. I'd like to speak with you alone for a moment. Lucas glanced at Tessa, who nodded slightly. Of course, he agreed. The two men stepped outside into the hotel corridor, leaving Tessa alone with her mother and Emma. I've missed you, Mother, Tessa said softly as soon as the door closed. Eleanor's composure finally broke, tears streaming down her face. Oh, Tessa, I've missed you too, every day. I should have stood up to your father sooner, should have insisted he not send you away. It's all right, Tessa assured her. In a strange way, it's worked out for the best. If father hadn't cast me out, I would never have met Lucas. Eleanor studied her daughter's face. You love him, don't you? Tessa nodded, admitting it aloud for the first time. Yes, I do. And does he love you? Eleanor asked gently. I think so, Tessa replied. We haven't spoken of it directly, but yes, I believe he does. Eleanor smiled through her tears. I can see it in the way he looks at you. The way he stood up to your father, not many men would have the courage to do that. They talked for a while longer, Tessa filling her mother in on her life at the ranch, Emma's development, and her hopes for the future. It was a balm to her soul to reconnect with her mother, to feel that family bond renewed. Meanwhile, in the hotel corridor, Lucas faced Thomas Clarke's scrutiny. I won't pretend to approve of this situation, Thomas began bluntly. My daughter was raised to know better. Lucas bit back a sharp retort, reminding himself that this was Tessa's father. With all due respect, sir, Tessa has shown remarkable strength and character in the face of difficult circumstances. You should be proud of her. Thomas Clarke's eyes narrowed. Are you lecturing me, young man? No, sir, Lucas replied evenly, just stating facts as I see them. A tense silence fell between them before Thomas spoke again. Do you intend to marry her? The question, though not unexpected, still caught Lucas off guard. That would be Tessa's decision as much as mine, he said carefully. That's not an answer, Thomas pressed. Lucas met the older man's gaze directly. Yes, I hope to marry her if she'll have me. I love her and I love Emma as if she were my own, but I won't rush Tessa into anything. She's had enough men making decisions for her. Thomas Clarke studied Lucas for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. At least you're honest, he sighed, some of the rigidity leaving his posture. My wife hasn't been the same since Tessa left. She misses her terribly. Then perhaps you should consider allowing Tessa back into your lives, Lucas suggested. For your wife's sake, if not for Tessa's. It's not that simple, Thomas muttered, isn't it? Lucas challenged. You have a daughter who loves you despite everything and a granddaughter who deserves to know her family. Seems pretty simple to me. Before Thomas could respond, the door to the parlor opened and Eleanor appeared. Thomas, you should come see this. Emma is trying to stand. The two men followed her back into the parlor, where Tessa was indeed helping Emma balance on her chubby legs, holding her tiny hands for support. She's been trying for days now, Tessa explained, looking up with a smile. She's determined to walk before she's ready. Stubborn, Thomas commented again, but this time with a hint of pride in his voice. Like all the Clarke women, the tension in the room had dissipated somewhat. Thomas and Eleanor stayed for another hour, during which time Thomas gradually unbent enough to ask questions about Emma's development and Tessa's life at the ranch. He was far from fully reconciled to the situation, but it was a beginning. When it was time for them to leave, they were staying at the hotel for the night before returning to Oak Ridge the next day. Eleanor hugged Tessa tightly. Write to me, she whispered, and perhaps you could visit sometime. Your father might be more amenable on his own territory. Thomas merely shook Lucas's hand stiffly and gave Tessa a formal nod, but as he turned to leave, he paused. She's a fine child, he said, glancing at Emma. You're doing well by her. It was as close to approval as Tessa was likely to get, and she accepted it gratefully. Thank you, Father. After her parents left, Tessa sat down heavily, emotionally drained from the unexpected confrontation and partial reconciliation. Are you all right? Lucas asked, crouching beside her chair. Tessa nodded. Yes, better than I expected to be, actually. She looked at him curiously. What did my father say to you when you were alone? Lucas hesitated, then decided on honesty. He asked if I intended to marry you. Tessa's breath caught. And what did you tell him? That I hoped to if you were willing, Lucas replied, his eyes holding hers. But that I wouldn't rush you into anything. Tessa's heart raced at his words. Lucas. Tessa, I love you, he said simply. I think I have since that first day when you stood on the street in Oak Ridge, holding Emma, looking so brave despite everything, but I need you to be sure. I need you to want me not just because I'm offering security or a home. Tears filled Tessa's eyes. Lucas Merritt, I love you too, not for the home you've given us, though I'm grateful for that. I love you for your kindness, your strength, the way you look at Emma as if she's the most precious thing in the world. The way you look at me as if I'm whole and worthy, not damaged or shameful. Lucas reached out to take her hand. You are worthy, Tessa, you always have been. Then yes, she said softly. Yes, I would be honored to marry you. Lucas's face broke into a smile of such joy that it transformed him completely. He drew her to her feet and into his arms, careful not to disturb Emma, who had fallen asleep in Tessa's lap. His kiss was gentle yet filled with promise, a perfect reflection of the man himself. When they finally broke apart, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. We should get back to the ranch, he murmured. It's been quite a day. Tessa smiled up at him, the first of many together. The return journey to the ranch was filled with a new sense of purpose and possibility. Emma slept peacefully in Tessa's arms, unaware of the momentous decisions that had been made that day. As they approached the ranch, the house came into view, solid and welcoming in the moonlight. Tessa looked at it with new eyes, not as a temporary shelter but as a true home, a place where she and Emma belonged, where they would build a future with Lucas. What are you thinking? Lucas asked, noticing her contemplative expression. That I never expected to find happiness again after my father cast me out, Tessa replied honestly. That day, holding Emma with nowhere to go, it felt like the end of everything, but it was really just the beginning. Lucas reached over to take her hand, his eyes reflecting the starlight. For all three of us, he agreed. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with only a few guests in attendance, Tessa's parents, Thomas Clarke still stiff but making an effort, Mrs. Peterson from the dress shop, and Harlan Bishop and his wife from the neighboring ranch. Illegitimate Clarke had arrived 3 days before the wedding to help with preparations, and had spent most of that time bonding with her granddaughter. Thomas Clarke remained more reserved but had unbent enough to have a long conversation with Lucas about ranching and to allow Tessa to show him around the property. You've done well for yourself here, he had grudgingly admitted to Lucas. It's a fine spread. Coming from Thomas Clarke, it was high praise indeed. After the ceremony, as they shared a celebratory meal under the shade of the large oak tree near the house, Tessa found a moment alone with her mother. Are you happy, truly? Illegitimate asked, watching as Lucas showed Thomas the new calf born just that morning, Emma perched on his shoulders. Happier than I ever thought possible, Tessa confirmed. Lucas is a good man, Mother, the best man I've ever known. Illegitimate squeezed her hand. I can see that. And I can see how much he loves both you and Emma. She hesitated, then added, Your father is coming around in his own way. Give him time. I will, Tessa promised. Having you both here today means more than I can say. As summer turned to fall and fall to winter, the Merritt household settled into the rhythms of married life. Lucas legally adopted Emma, making her officially his daughter in name as well as in his heart. Tessa's correspondence with her mother became regular, and Thomas Clarke even wrote occasionally. His brief notes focused mainly on Emma, but gradually including news of Oak Ridge and tentative inquiries about Tessa's well-being. On a snowy evening in early December, as they sat by the fire, Emma now walking confidently and chattering in her limited vocabulary, Lucas made an announcement. I've been thinking about expanding the house in the spring, he said, watching Emma stack wooden blocks on the rug. Adding another bedroom or two, Tessa looked up from her sewing with a smile. That sounds like a good idea. Emma will need her own room eventually. And perhaps other children might need rooms too, Lucas suggested, his eyes meeting hers meaningfully. Tessa's smile widened. Perhaps they might, she agreed, her hand moving unconsciously to her stomach. She had suspected for a few weeks now, but had been waiting for the right moment to share her news. In fact, I believe we might need that extra room sooner than you think. Lucas's eyes widened as he understood her meaning. Tessa, are you? She nodded, joy bubbling up inside her. Yes, come summer, Emma will have a little brother or sister. Lucas was across the room in an instant, gathering her in his arms, his face alight with happiness. I love you, he whispered against her hair. So much. And I love you, Tessa replied, marveling at how far they had come from that cold March day when she had stood alone on the street, an outcast with a child in her arms and nowhere to go. Lucas had not only built them a home on his land, he had built them a life filled with love, acceptance, and possibility. As Emma toddled over to join their embrace, Tessa knew with absolute certainty that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as a family. Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the ranch in pristine white, a fresh start for a new season in their lives together. Inside, warmth and love filled every corner of the home that Lucas had built, not just with timber and nails, but with kindness, patience, and unwavering devotion. Tessa Clarke Merritt, once cast out and alone, had found her place in the world not despite her past, but because of it. For it had led her here, to this man, this child, this home, to this love that had saved them all.